There is a moment in every life when the noise outside becomes too loud to ignore. Expectations, fears, memories, doubts, voices that are not ours but have lived inside us for years. They tell us who to be, what to do, what to desire, what to avoid. They whisper that we are not enough, that we must push harder, that we must constantly chase something that always seems to stay one step ahead. And yet, beneath all that external pressure, beneath the layers of roles and masks and identities we collect across time, something quieter lives. Something far older than any opinion, more honest than any belief, and more patient than any fear. A voice that does not shout, does not demand, and never forces its way into the center of attention. It waits, it watches, it knows. That is the voice we spend most of our life running from, the voice of the soul. The tragedy is not that the soul is silent, but that we have forgotten how to listen. We spend our days reacting, trying to keep up with a world that rewards noise but punishes stillness. We rush into relationships, responsibilities, ambitions, and conflicts, driven not by inner direction, but by the fear of disappointing others or falling behind. Every step taken without listening is a step taken blind. It may look productive on the surface, but internally it deepens the sense of fragmentation, as if we are living a life that belongs to someone else. You can feel it in the tension that never leaves your chest, in the restlessness that never truly goes away, in the sense that something essential is missing, even when everything seems fine from the outside. The soul does not disappear when ignored. It waits. It waits for the day when the exhaustion becomes too heavy, when the distractions no longer numb the ache, when the noise finally cracks, and something inside whispers, quietly but unmistakably, that the life you are living is not the one you were meant for. This is not a dramatic moment filled with lightning or revelation. It is subtle, a discomfort, a longing, a question. Something in you begins to ask whether the path you are walking is truly yours or simply the result of habit, fear, or imitation. When this whisper appears, everything changes, because this is the first sign of awakening. But awakening is not comfortable. Listening to the soul requires the courage to enter silence, and silence is frightening because we fear what we might find there. We fear regret. We fear truth. We fear the recognition that we have betrayed ourselves, that we have chosen convenience over authenticity, or that we have spent years molding ourselves into what others expected rather than what we truly are. The soul does not judge, but it does illuminate. And illumination can be painful when we've lived too long in the shadows of our own avoidance. The first step is learning to be still. Not physically still, but internally still. To sit with yourself without reaching for distractions, without escaping into noise, without trying to control every thought that emerges. It is in this internal stillness that the deeper guidance begins to surface. Not as instructions, not as a clear voice telling you exactly what to do, but as a sense, a pull, a clarity that seems to rise from nowhere but feels more honest than anything else you've ever known. You recognize it because it does not flatter your ego. It does not reinforce your fears. It does not promise comfort, it simply tells the truth. To listen is to allow yourself to feel what you have avoided, the disappointments you never processed, the dreams you abandoned because someone told you they were unrealistic, the values you violated to fit in, the guilt you carry, the pain you bury, the identity you hide. The soul brings all of this to the surface not to punish you but to free you. For as long as these fragments remain suppressed, you will be driven by them unconsciously. You will react instead of act, repeat old cycles instead of grow, and mistake temporary relief for real peace. And when you finally listen, something remarkable happens. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily and deeply. You begin to feel aligned. Decisions become clearer because they are no longer fueled by fear. Relationships shift because you no longer betray yourself to maintain them. The world does not change, but your way of meeting it does. You stop living as a collection of reactions and begin living as a coherent being, a person who moves from an inner center, not from external pressure. The soul knows the way. It always has. The question is whether you will finally be quiet enough, brave enough, and honest enough to listen. There comes a point when listening to the soul is no longer an abstract idea, but a necessity. The weight of living out of alignment becomes too heavy to carry, and the life built on automatic patterns begins to feel like a cage. People often think that inner transformation happens through sudden breakthroughs or dramatic events, but it is usually born from a quiet realization that you cannot continue living the way you have been living without losing something essential. Not your job, not your relationships, not your ambitions, but yourself. The soul speaks through discomfort long before it speaks through clarity. The uneasiness you feel at night, the dissatisfaction that follows you even when things are going well, the sense that something inside is calling for your attention. These are all signs that your inner compass is trying to reorient your path. Listening to that compass requires honesty, and honesty with oneself is one of the most difficult forms of courage. It demands that you admit when you are pretending. It demands that you acknowledge the desires you suppress, the boundaries you fail to defend, and the truths you silence to avoid conflict or disappointment. The world teaches you how to adapt, how to survive, how to fit in. But the soul teaches you how to be yourself, and the two paths do not always match. This is where the internal conflict begins. You find yourself torn between the comfort of familiarity and the call of authenticity. One keeps you safe, the other keeps you alive. Authenticity is not about expressing everything you feel or rejecting everything that challenges you. It is the steady act of aligning your inner world with your outer actions. It is choosing integrity over approval. It is recognizing when your silence is self-protection and when it is self-betrayal. It is understanding that the soul does not ask you to abandon your life, but to inhabit it fully, without the filters you once used to make yourself acceptable to others. This process is not simple. You will face resistance, not because you are weak, but because your old identity has momentum. Every habit, every belief, every fear you polished over the years pulls you toward familiar patterns. The soul asks you to break those patterns, not through force, but through awareness. Awareness is the beginning of freedom. When you become aware of why you react the way you do, why certain situations trigger discomfort, why some relationships drain you while others nourish you, you start reclaiming power over your life. What once felt inevitable begins to look optional. What once felt automatic begins to look chosen. Awareness creates space, and in that space the soul finally has room to speak. It speaks subtly through intuition, through clarity, through the quiet feeling that something is right or wrong even before your mind forms the reasoning. Listening to this intuition is an act of trust, and trust is built slowly. You learn to trust the soul not by believing in it blindly, but by following its guidance once, seeing the outcome, and realizing that it had been leading you toward truth all along. This trust often leads you into unfamiliar territory. Growth always begins where certainty ends. When you step outside the roles you have played for years, you may feel lost, but this kind of lostness is not a mistake. It is a sign that you are no longer living on autopilot. You are no longer numbing your instincts to meet expectations that were never yours to begin with. You are beginning to walk a path that does not yet have shape, but already has direction. You will feel tension between who you were and who you are becoming. This tension is not a problem. It is the doorway to transformation. Every meaningful change in life requires the willingness to disappoint the version of yourself that once saw survival and truth as opposites. The more you listen to the soul, the more you begin to understand that inner peace does not come from getting what you want, but from living in alignment with what is true. You stop chasing validation because validation loses its power over someone who knows who they are. You stop demanding certainty from the future because you learn to navigate by the quiet authority of your inner voice. You stop fighting every emotion because you understand that emotions are messengers, not threats. You stop clinging to the past because you realize that the past is not a place to live, only a place to learn from. Slowly, piece by piece, you begin to feel like yourself again. And when you reach this point, something subtle but profound happens. Life becomes less about control and more about connection. You connect with your values, your purpose, your truth. You connect with others not through fear or need, but through presence. And above all, you reconnect with the part of you that always knew the way, even when you didn't. You return to the guidance you had abandoned. You return to the clarity you once ignored. You return to yourself. As you continue listening to the soul, you begin to notice something unexpected. The world around you changes, not because it has been transformed, but because your perception has. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once felt confusing becomes transparent. What once felt threatening becomes a mirror that reflects what still needs healing. The outer world stops feeling like an enemy you must defend yourself from, and begins to feel like a landscape through which you navigate with growing clarity. This shift is not magical. It is the natural outcome of finally understanding that your experience of life is shaped far more by your inner state than by external circumstances. When you change the lens, the world rearranges itself. But this stage of the journey is delicate. It is easy to romanticize inner growth, to imagine that listening to the soul fills life with unbroken peace and effortless certainty. The truth is more nuanced. The more aligned you become, the more sensitive you become to environments, situations, and relationships that pull you away from that alignment. You start noticing the conversations that leave you feeling drained, the habits that dull your awareness, the commitments you made out of obligation rather than conviction. This awareness is uncomfortable because it forces you to confront the fragments of your life that no longer match who you are becoming. You may feel a tension between honoring your inner truth and maintaining the structures you have built around a self that is slowly dissolving. This is the moment when many people retreat back into familiar patterns, because growth often asks for changes that the mind resists. The soul's path requires honesty with yourself, but it also requires courage to act on that honesty. You may need to set boundaries where none existed before. You may need to distance yourself from environments that suffocate your inner clarity. You may need to say no to things that once defined your identity. You may even need to let go of people with whom you shared a chapter, but not a direction. These choices are painful, but they mark the difference between understanding your truth and living it. The soul does not ask you to sacrifice connections, but it does ask you to choose connections that allow you to remain yourself. It does not ask you to isolate yourself from the world, but it does ask you to stop abandoning yourself in order to belong. One of the most challenging aspects of this process is the confrontation with fear. Fear is not the enemy of the soul. It is the guardian of your unhealed parts. It stands at the edge of every transformation, reminding you of every past failure, every painful memory, every insecurity that you buried but never resolved. Fear's job is to protect you from hurt, but in protecting you, it also prevents you from growing. Listening to the soul means learning to walk through fear without letting it dictate your steps. You begin to understand that fear rises not because something is wrong, but because something is changing. And change, while uncomfortable, is the very essence of becoming. As you face these fears, you begin to see that most of them are not rooted in reality, but in old narratives that no longer reflect the person you are now. You were hurt once, so you fear being hurt again. You failed before, so you fear trying again. You were rejected once, so you fear showing your true self. But the soul is not concerned with who you used to be. It is concerned with who you can become. It pulls you steadily toward expansion, toward authenticity, toward inner coherence. The more you follow its guidance, the more you begin to trust that the path ahead is not something you need to control, but something you need to participate in with awareness and honesty. This participation gradually awakens a deeper form of strength, one that does not depend on force, certainty, or external validation. It is the strength of someone who is anchored in themselves, a strength that comes from knowing that you can face discomfort, walk through fear, and still remain aligned. A strength that comes from understanding that your value is intrinsic, not negotiable. A strength that cannot be taken away because it does not depend on anything outside of you. And then something even more profound occurs. You begin to realize that the soul's guidance is not meant only for isolated decisions or specific crises. It is meant to shape the entire way you inhabit your life. Your priorities shift. Your motivations shift. You stop striving for a sense of worthiness because you finally understand that worthiness is not something you earn, it is something you remember. You stop seeking constant reassurance because you recognize that stability comes from inner coherence. You stop trying to fit into spaces where you must shrink to be accepted. You stop chasing outcomes that contradict your deeper truth. As you live more closely aligned with the soul, peace becomes less of a distant dream and more of a natural byproduct of authenticity. Not a perfect peace, not an unbroken calm, but a groundedness that allows you to move through life with clarity, even in moments of chaos. You begin to feel a sense of coming home to yourself, as if every step you take brings you closer to a life that fits who you are, rather than a life you once forced yourself into. And when you reach this point, you understand something essential. The guidance you were looking for was never missing. You were simply too distant from yourself to hear it. There comes a moment in this journey when you look back and realize how far you have traveled, not in distance, but in awareness. You see the patterns you once obeyed without question. You see the fears that once shaped your decisions. You see the version of yourself that moved through life trying to please, trying to survive, trying to quiet the inner restlessness without ever understanding its origin. And you begin to understand that every step, even the misguided ones, carried you toward this point of clarity. Nothing was wasted. Every mistake taught you something about the parts of yourself you had abandoned. Every disappointment revealed where you had placed your trust outside of yourself. Every conflict became a mirror, reflecting what still needed healing. When you finally see this, you stop viewing your past as something to escape and begin seeing it as something to integrate. Integration is not about rewriting the past or pretending pain never existed. It is about letting every piece of your story take its rightful place within you. You stop rejecting the parts of yourself that struggled, that failed, that feared, that avoided. You stop dividing yourself into the person you approve of and the person you hope no one sees. Integration means giving yourself permission to be whole, not perfect. It means allowing your contradictions to coexist without shame. It means recognizing that your wounds shaped your wisdom, your confusion shaped your clarity, your lostness shaped your direction. When you integrate instead of reject, the soul's guidance becomes clearer, because you finally stand as one unified being rather than a fragmented collection of identities. This is where a deeper transformation begins. You start to understand that listening to the soul is not an event, not a revelation, not a sudden awakening. It is a practice, a discipline, a way of being. It requires returning to yourself again and again, especially when life becomes loud. It demands that you protect your inner stillness, not as an escape from reality, but as the foundation from which you engage with it. You begin to create rituals of listening, moments of silence, honest reflection, intentional presence. These moments become anchors, reminding you that clarity comes not from rushing, but from aligning. As you cultivate this alignment, something profound begins to unfold. Your life starts to reflect your inner truth. Choices become simpler because the noise inside you has quieted. Relationships become more authentic because you no longer hide behind roles. Your path becomes clearer because you no longer move through life trying to satisfy expectations that were never yours. You discover that peace is not the absence of challenge, but the absence of inner conflict. You discover that purpose is not something you chase, but something you express when you live from your truth. You discover that fulfillment has less to do with what you achieve and more to do with who you become while living honestly. And then, perhaps for the first time, you begin to trust yourself. Not the self built on fear or habit, but the self that emerges when you stop running from your inner voice. This trust changes everything. It softens you because you no longer need to be defensive. It strengthens you because you no longer depend on external approval. It frees you because you finally understand that the guidance you seek does not exist somewhere outside waiting to be found. It lives quietly within you, waiting to be heard. When this realization settles into your bones, you begin to walk differently. You navigate life not by forcing, but by sensing, not by controlling, but by responding. Not by acting from fear, but by choosing from clarity. And this is when a final understanding emerges, the kind that cannot be taught and cannot be rushed. You realize that your soul always knew the way. Every instinct, every discomfort, every whisper, every moment of longing was a message guiding you home. You were never lost, you were never broken, you were never without direction. You were simply disconnected from the quiet truth that has lived inside you since the beginning. The journey was never about becoming someone new. It was about returning to who you already are beneath the layers of noise, fear, and expectation. Listening to the soul does not guarantee a perfect life. It guarantees an authentic one. A life where your actions match your truth. A life where your choices emerge from clarity rather than confusion. A life where you no longer abandon yourself for acceptance. A life where you face challenges with presence instead of panic. A life where you finally feel aligned, grounded, and whole. In the end, the soul does not ask for perfection or certainty. It asks for silence, honesty, and courage. It asks that you stop running long enough to hear what has always been speaking. It asks that you trust the path that unfolds when you finally listen. Because the soul knows the way, not because it sees the future, but because it knows who you truly are.